so much for joining us for Develop SF, the first post-COVID event after about 2 years. So each and every one of you are super important to us, and I'm so glad that you're participating. I first off want to thank Presence, who is our gracious host and kind of giving us an opportunity to kind of revive the event. And just a little bit of background information about me and about Tango. So I started Tango back in 2010. We're a nearshore outsourced product development agency, primarily based in Mexico. That's where all of our talent is. And we work with companies like Presence. We've worked with Presence for the last 2 years to good effect in providing engineering talent, and basically for people that want products built, you're looking for just somebody who's going to make software without asking questions and just develop features. That's not us. But if you want people that actually care about the end user and are craftspeople, that's more about what we're about. I would say we sort of fit that niche between outsourcer and employee in terms of a lot of things. But we're big fans of product development and of sort of the Silicon Valley product group style of delivery and discovery and doing things in a multidisciplinary way, and not just like, here's some code. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to talking with our panel, but I'd also like to give Sariah an opportunity to talk about Presence.
We're a digital agency. We build digital products, and we're leaning heavily on the engineering side. We have teams of engineers and QA engineers, devs, product managers, project leads that all come together to build products for other companies, large and small, from startups to large corporations like General Motors and folks like that. I'm very long-winded. I am notoriously long-winded, so I'm going to keep it real tight tonight. Okay.
Thanks. Okay, so I think we're going to, first off, thank you to all the panelists that are here. I would, ask maybe for a quick introduction from each of you, just to, set the stage for our talk on digital transformation.
When you say quick,
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Elevator pitch.
I have a quick intro and a story related to Eric's work. So why don't you go first, and then I'll do that. I think it's very relevant.
Okay. How's the audio?
It's good.
Hi, I'm Sam McAfee. I manage a consulting company called Startup Patterns. By way of bio, it's really nice to be in this building. I haven't been in South Park in a long time, and this is sort of a place of legend in the startup industry for when I first got started in this field. So I came up in the dot-com boom, and this is kind of where a lot of that stuff started. Software engineering background. I built lots and lots of systems and wrote lots of lines of code for many years. Sort of migrated from engineering into product. I've been a consultant for most of my career, but I had some brief stints as a senior technology leader in a couple of bigger organizations. Startup Patterns, mostly what we do these days is we're kind of on the org transformation, change management side of digital transformation. So we all have very technical backgrounds. We certainly work with teams that are building products, but most of our focus these days is more with the leadership team and the org and how to kind of go about doing digital transformation in a way that doesn't crush everybody downstairs along the way. So that's my very brief intro.
Hi, I'm Jay Gonzales. I'm with a company called Beezwax. We're, I think similar in that we're a software development consulting company. What makes us a little bit different, we don't work on as many products. A lot of our clients are, more business systems, and that in that case, it's a little bit, it's not as much fun sometimes, and we don't have as many users to report to, but we'll build, a multi-$100,000 system that supports 5 users and a whole lot of data. So we do work a lot with data and design. And the story I want to mention about Eric was, I think it was maybe 8 years ago. Eric's been running these types of events for a long time. And they used to run as a hiring event for web devs and recruiters. I think that's still some of the nature of this. I was at one where there were like 2 people from this little tiny company called Magoosh, and I think they've made it pretty big, and to the point that I was listening to the radio on the way up here, and I heard an ad from them talking about their services. So I thought that was incredibly cool that when you come to these things, now our company is certainly not going to be Magoosh, nor are we trying to, but they've hit the list of Inc. fastest growing companies for several years. I think they probably have hundreds, if not thousands, of employees. And you never know when you come to these events what you're gonna find, who you're gonna meet, and that's why I love them. I was really excited to see them coming back after the COVID winter and have an opportunity to be on the panel.
Hello again. My name is Sariah Sizemore. My background, I fell into technology in 1997 when I was 18 years old. I'll date myself. Working for a DOS-based software in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And quickly got swept up into the cool new realm of technology at that age and moved to California to work in the tech industry in the dot-com boom. And quickly found myself very excited and inspired by all of the creative minds and the fast pace of the technology that I was getting to engage in and help build. But also found myself burning out. And quickly found lots of practices to help balance myself and be able to approach the way that I work in a healthy and balanced way. So got into yoga and meditation and healing work and all kinds of things, and eventually left technology for a small while and started a coaching and healing business where I worked with folks that worked at all of the big unicorn technology companies like Twitter and Facebook and Uber, and worked with them one-on-one as clients, as well as did talks to those folks on how to take care of yourself and all that good stuff and not burn out when we come together to build technology. And eventually I decided that I wanted to re-enter the world of tech for various reasons. And my intention was to find a company that was engaging in building technology that does more good than harm, that have good values, that care about their people, and that create a culture of folks coming together to build technology that is kind and generous and balanced. And that's where I landed at Presence. So Jason is shyly hanging out in the background back there. So I'm gonna call you out, Jason. Jason is the mastermind behind all of it here. So I work with Presence as their head of product quality. I oversee all of the software testing that we do on the various projects that we are engaged with. I believe that quality is not only a result of the tools and techniques and strategies that we employ to deliver quality products, but are equally, what's equally as important are the people that come together to build the products and the teams and the relationships. So when I think about quality, it's that balance of the humanistic and the digital. So yeah, thanks.
Cool.
You want to battle?
Feedback battle. Yeah, and so super briefly about me, I come from a computer engineering background and learned hardware and software and worked at Boeing for a while. So probably the least like anybody here in terms of, coming from one of those types of companies. And I was just kind of in this soul crushing job, being sort of an integrator, and not actually really writing anything interesting software wise. I was touching code that was written in the late 80s at the time. And so I started doing my own products and, eventually got into sort of that as the business that I, the problem that I solved for myself became the thing that I started to sell. But I am in the business because I love product and I love the impact that founders and their teams, the teams that support them, have in the world. And so for me, there's sort of meaning versus money, and I feel like if people create, if we're getting philosophical, people creating meaning and value in the world, if it's reasonably designed, can make a living as well. Anyway, so that's enough about me. I actually was curious to hear, so first off, we're talking about engineering versus design in digital transformation. And I picked this topic because, first off, I think we're in Presence's house here, and they have a lot of experience with digital transformation. And I feel like it would be an interesting opportunity to sort of showcase that. But also, there was just this interesting pitch, which was like, oh yeah, we worked for various clients, and we actually did sort of this bottom-up approach to digital transformation instead of sort of this designing top-down approach. And the technology was enabling all these changes. And oftentimes in startups and you name it, any digital product, designers are constrained without being aware of it, right? So they have this huge customer experience thing that they design almost in a vacuum without really understanding the platform that they're building on top of and what the changes are that would facilitate that. Anyway, so that's how we kind of got here, and I in terms of that whole engineering versus design. But the first question that I have for everybody is digital transformation a thing, essentially? Like, is it marketing lingo, or is it actually useful as a paradigm by which we do work? From your experience or your opinion, anybody can
Can you
tackle it.
explain just what, in your verse,
Yeah.
like what digital transformation is in your terms?
Yeah. So and we had this conversation. So for me, I feel like transformation is you're trying to change or respond to the change in market and technology and say, okay, so how this company delivers value has to change. How it relates to the world has to change. And so the core technology that supports that in value creation is typically out of date. But ultimately, it's a fundamental sort of relationship with the world that matters the most, and that's the transformation.
Yeah, I'd say, honing in on a couple things that you've all mentioned and talking earlier with Sam. There's nothing specific to what you said that is completely digital, right? I think the transformation part, we've gone through changes. There's pre-COVID, there's COVID, there's now, there's economic uncertainty, or being, how many of you would say either I have a job or I don't have a job, and I love my job or I don't like my job, but I'm stuck in some ways, right? So either you got to get out of that with transformation, or do something. But whether it's organizational transformation, whether it's personal transformation, right? We've already talked about those, and I think those are key. I think that that's one reason I'm here, to do a change. I haven't addressed a room, been in a meeting with this many people in who knows how long. But it's a new time. I felt like I needed a transformation, and this is kind of spur this on. So I think the transformation is the key part. The digital part maybe it's been around 11 years. I think I read an article that said, tracing back to 2011, that term really became popularized. So it's become a cliche, but maybe it's partly truism. But the transformation part, I think people are always looking for. That's the definition of innovation, if you will. Another word to throw around and debate how solid it is.
So I think that in general, this industry is pretty filled with jargon. There's a lot of jargon, and a personal mission of mine is to always try to cut through the jargon and get to what's true, what's truth. And so I believe that if we just taking into account everything that's going on in the world and the massive speed in which technology is evolving, are you guys seeing all of those selfies that have been transformed into avatars through the AI? Yeah, I was getting ready to come out here tonight, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a really interesting example of digital transformation, kind of off the rails almost, because there's a lot of fundamental questions and opinions that that is bringing up. Anyway, we could probably go down a whole rabbit hole about that, but transformation means I think to evolve, right? I transform, I wake up in the morning, I've got a bed head, I go take a shower, I put on my clothes. I've transformed into a different version of myself than when I rolled out of bed, right? And we're always transforming. So that's one way of evolution. But then there's transmutation, which is where you take one thing and one thing actually turns into another thing. It's a great example of transmutation in nature is butterfly. So you have the caterpillar goes into the chrysalis and comes out as a butterfly. So I think really it's about getting down to what's possible, what's really possible if we cut through the BS of all the jargon and the buzzwords and the marketing of how do we really want to use technology to evolve ourselves as human beings, our work, our lives, our families. And if you want to think about digital transformation like that, I think it's a thing. Right? Okay.
I'll take a shot at my understanding. I love the answers that we've had so far. I think for me, I was thinking about when Sariah, when you were giving your bio, I remember those days, and I think that having worked with a variety of organizations, some of the organizations that I've worked with they're post-internet tech startup digital native organizations, and some of them are really old. I did some work with PG&E, and I did some work with Procter & Gamble. And some of these much more rooted organizations, and so I think there's also a long arc kind of macroeconomic element to it, that there's a lot of inertia in how businesses and organizations were structured during the industrial era of the 20th century. And when we started really having this sort of information age, internet kind of revolution thing going on, there are companies that have been founded sort of post-internet boom or post.com boom that are a little bit more digitally native, right? They're sort of building software as part of their products and that sort of thing. And there are a lot of other companies that are been around a long time, and their way of doing things is sort of the way that we would think of as still pretty old-fashioned. And so a lot of those companies, and there are still very many of them, have code running on mainframes that is written in the 70s, right? There's still stuff out there like that. So I think there's also an element of transformation that has to do with overhauling a lot of that stuff and embracing the modern realities of what people expect, what employees expect, what consumers expect, and having to look at the way that they're doing things, which maybe didn't need to change for a very long time, and then all of a sudden, there's a lot of competitive pressures on them with new technical upstarts. And so they look at their systems and have to kind of really rethink everything. And some of those transformations are successful, and some of them aren't so much, right? And so for me, like the idea of a digital transformation is like fraught with danger, that you can really do it the wrong way. And so it's a little bit of like a story, kind of a dramatic story, where, you know, a hero's journey of like, we're gonna try to get from here to the promised land, and it's like a, you know, lots of trials and tribulations along the way and things that can go wrong. So I think that when people are in an organization that's going through some kind of massive change like that, that hero's journey is everyone's individual reality when they go to work. Like those trials affect them personally and how to get their job done and what their job definition is and whether their boss changes or, oh, we're all switching to this system now, and so you have to relearn a whole new system. Like, I have a lot of empathy and compassion for the people in organizations that are going through these transformations because it can have a really big impact on them. So that's kind of how I've been thinking.
So I was thinking kind of, there's a couple of interesting topics that we could explore. One that I kind of was making up in our one-on-one discussions was this concept of organizational debt as opposed to just technical debt, because I think a lot of us come from an engineering background, and so we all know what tech debt is, right? But there's a lot of complexity and reasons why tech debt builds up, right? And gets ignored, and other things get invested in. And even if the technology is up to date, the processes and the culture around that don't necessarily change. If magically you wave a wand and you're like, yeah, we've got like cutting edge technology that's just been implemented, it may still not be effective if the organization and the individuals behind it can't support it. So that concept I think is an interesting one. And then I guess the other one, you know, not taking maybe too many seats here, but maybe getting really concrete with examples of how it actually works, or like any war stories or whatever that people have had that might be good lessons for the audience. So either of those, if you feel like tackling.
What's most inspiring for you?
Well, I think I like maybe, you are always asking like these super engaging questions to me, like I'm the interesting person here or something like that.
You're the leader.
Well, you guys are the more interesting ones. But I would say, for me, I'd love to hear like concrete examples of experiences that you've had, where the audience can see this topic from different facets, right? So it's like, here's a way it went well, here's a way it didn't go. I think that might be instructive.
We're not allowed to tell the stories about when it didn't go well.
Just don't name the
We
client.
learn from it.
Any names.
Or maybe pitfalls. Yeah, don't name any names.
Yeah, I'll talk about it in general. I like the idea of, there's another example of how you took technical debt and talked about it as, like compared it with organizational debt. And I think you can't divorce the two, right? Because technical debt ultimately has an effect on the organization. You're the dev team, but you have to tell the product owner, hey, we need a sprint or 2 or 5 to overcome our technical debt. That's going to affect your product release cycle. That's going to affect the business, or whoever the stakeholders, they need to know about that. So that is because organizations are so like, if you're tech centric or not. If you are, then technical debt is the center of your organizational debt. If it's not, we've seen that happen where organizations go through that transformation. For me, it was like there's a difference between being a digital organization and not being it. And because we work with sort of like, if you look at the technology adoption curve, enterprise And enterprise work group and education and small business are all at the trailing end of that. And we get to work, our company works with a lot of those types of groups. And the place that we still have entrepreneurs is what we call internal entrepreneurs. So someone who wants to grab an initiative and hopefully get through the bureaucracy to do some change, to get off a mainframe or do something, in the shadow outside of the mainframe. They're trying to overcome, they're just trying to get the digital transformation to adopt technology. We saw it a lot with education. So we traditionally never worked with education institutions a whole lot, even though there are a lot in our, we do a little bit of product development and other development in the Apple ecosystem, and Apple's really big on education. But we just hadn't found school districts or private, schools or nonprofits that in education. But during COVID, that changed, and I think that was actually from non-digital to digital transformation, where you went from iPads in the classroom, you're using digital, but you're not a digital organization, to everyone's remote, our whole infrastructure is now, distributed. Kids have to be online, the teachers have to be online, the administration has to be online. You're moving from on-prem to cloud. That's the other, you can call that digital transformation as well, but it's a fundamental organizational change. And we had a couple of projects we worked on that was just too hard. Education has a duty to first figure out anything to, take care of students, curriculum, teachers, and so they kept doing some of that on paper. They didn't make the change. Others, we did a program where we got invited in to one of our partners, which is a company called Claris, part of Apple, to build apps. And we were like, education apps, that's not that exciting, but to be able to go to organizations and have they partner with Apple sales teams. So that's if you want to be busy in the market, that's not a bad place to be. And we found that a couple of schools they were able to switch everything over to digital. Some weren't, some were able to. So technical debt or organizational debt and overcoming it. Some are successful, some aren't.
So many things that I could say. So I think that where the two, you can have really slick tools, digital tools to help facilitate building technology, right? We tools like Slack or Jira or Confluence, we have GitHub, we have all of these different tools. Figma for designs. There are these industry standard tools that we use, but we also have human beings that interpret the information that's getting digested by these tools and communicated through the technology, right? And so having had the opportunity to work at big technology companies, that's one thing. I worked at Avid, I worked in audio technology for a long time, worked on Pro Tools for years and years and years, worked on one thing. But then working at an agency where we basically create these mini teams that go in and build something for our clients. And that those mini teams, right, having had that experience, there's a theme that I've noticed that can become a roadblock with using the technology we have at our fingertips to actually facilitate a slick and streamlined process for building technology.
People have sort of ended up in boxes, and as part of the transformation, some of the work that we do is on figuring out, are people really in the right spot for the kind of work that we want them to do, right? So we do a lot of work around training organizations to do product discovery, new product development, like sort of lean startup style stuff. And we've worked in organizations that are very kind of, traditional and antiquated, and we go through like 12 weeks of training and we teach them all this stuff, and we go back and check and like, are you talking to customers? Well, no, not really. Like, it's too hard. Marketing won't give us the list. Like, there's all these reasons and excuses. But what we find is that like we can give people information about how to perform and how to do these new tactics, but they run up against the change resistance that's in the individual brains of everybody else in the organization, right? Because at the end of the day, like on a really kind of primal level, change is scary. Change is kind of a threat to our survival, at just a very kind of limbic system kind of level. And so whenever you're trying to do any sort of change, it's really important to take into account that everybody needs to see their role in it and to be assured that there's a path for them, right? Because if it's like, oh, you're coming in and you're changing my job, and like I've relied on, attached my identity to being really good at this particular thing, like, oh, we do lots of, manual QA, and we're gonna like automate everything. We're gonna move to all these like automated tests. So, people are afraid like, oh, does that mean you're gonna fire all the QA people? Right? Like that's a real question that happens in these transformations. And so it's really important for us to be able to find a place for people in the future, right? Like have a clear path for where everybody's actually going so that people can be reassured that there's a role for them, or maybe you have to change your role, or maybe you need to reskill, or there's some way to do that, but that you're not just kind of left hanging because your job doesn't exist anymore. And I think it's really important for us to be sensitive to that.
So I was kind of curious about, well, how can we avoid digital transformation? Right? like it sounds like it's really painful in at least a few cases. What are, and there's some sort of like I was saying in some of our one-on-ones, there's almost like this entropic decay that happens with applications and these forces that just make technology out of date and the organizations around them as well, right? Whether it's sort of the stuff that you might have learned from Innovator's Dilemma, right? But like, what can we do to avoid having to do digital transformation to begin with? Is that a reasonable question? Right.
On a personal level or an organizational level? And I know the answer could be both.
Yes.
Yes.
But yeah, whatever you've experienced, or
I had something related to that, but kind of in the area of at the personal level, and about communication. And I wanted to ask, like, do an informal audience poll, because I think you're all over there looking at us and wanting us to ask you questions. But and I'll point out why this is relevant on a personal level, right? How you adapt to the digital transformation or the changes at your organization. So if I gave you a choice and you had to choose one of the two, would you say, let's say you get an email, or especially like a Slack message, right? A group Slack from a manager or a coworker that's important. Do you respond right away? How many would we say you respond right away? All right, and how many of you would say that you wait and respond for whatever reason, because you choose to wait or because you prioritize other things than responding right away? How many would say you're in that category? Right. So I don't have an answer like what the knowledge nugget comes from this, but for example, I just learned that this is a thing. People sometimes get penalized, or they feel they get penalized in a work environment for not responding right away, right? The person who responds the first gets the answer, and if the answer is correct, then no one else gets to answer. And thus, you're the hero for responding, and if you didn't, you're punished. So anyhow, the reason that came to mind is, one, if you choose to prioritize, or if you choose, like, Slack's not going to rule my life, but the powers that be are saying, this is part of our digital transformation, you're kind of like fighting against, you're not a Luddite, but you're fighting against, like, is the digital part of this transformation, is digital transformation a necessity or going about it the right way, am I feeling comfortable? Do I have a role, as you said, like moving forward? So the reason it came to mind is I just learned this was a feeling of myself. Like I get frustrated, like, oh, other people are responding right away and they're getting praised for it. Tomorrow night at the Silicon Valley UX meetup, that's the topic. The CEO of, I will find her name, CEO of Ancestry wrote a book about this, and she's giving a talk. So I've signed up, but it was on my mind as like representative of things I didn't even realize was a phenomenon caused by a digital transformation. Because our companies got slack 2 years ago and is hog wild with it, and I feel like I'm an extrovert and an introvert, so probably the introvert of me doesn't always respond right away.
I was going to say also there's just remote considerations, and now a lot of companies are way more remote than they've ever been. And so there's a whole discipline around communication that still kind of needs to be developed.
Yeah.
Like how fast do you respond to a Slack message from a superior or someone higher up in the food chain, or however you want to say it, isn't even something that I've thought about. It's cultural, actually, I would say. Like there's a timing from various cultures, probably, in how people would respond in this sort of status differential situation, right? And so, maybe there needs to be a conscious culture around communication in today's setting, whatever that happens to be.
That could be technical debt. We've set up a distributed environment we use video, but our bandwidth isn't fast enough, and people don't feel like they're in the presence of everyone else. We've implemented technical infrastructure, but it's not quite good enough yet, right? We have these things to fix. It's organizational debt as well.
I think what I would add to that is that it's definitely real, right? And we've definitely seen it as well. I think if there's a bigger question of where the technology is being misused or abused in terms of like, okay, now we've got all these great chat tools and notification tools, and Git can ping you with various, messages at any time, that there's something broken in the culture, in the organization culture, the leadership style, that like if a manager is paying somebody, I don't know, we didn't say what time of day it is, but like let's say after hours or whatever it is, there's something bigger there, right? There's something broken in how, like, one, is something messed up that needs to be fixed and automated, and so it's like it's a kludgy system, and that's causing all this chaos. Or even if there is something broken, have we not articulated for people who work there to have reasonable work-life balance and personal boundaries? And so like it's incumbent on the leadership to be able to set the tone for the organization that no, we shouldn't be able to bug you, or like, we're going to ask these questions, but basically there needs to be some kind of counterbalancing policy or messaging put out that is the antidote to that anxiety that people feel like, oh, I have to answer right away because I'm going to have my annual review next week, and I don't want to be seen as uncooperative, right? Like, we have to kind of intentionally build leadership cultures that protect us against that sort of thing. And that's really the leadership's responsibility to do that.
Yeah.
And very briefly, I want to hear from Sariah. But I was just going to mention briefly that we started a little late, so I think we'll end a little bit late. We've got maybe 10 minutes or so. So I'd like to hear it. And then we'll have one more question, and then maybe take it to audience Q&A. But yeah, please.
Yeah, I wanted to pick it up on what he was saying again. Like, I think that we can't avoid digital transformation if we're using that as a term to describe the evolution of technological tools that we use to come together to build things and do our lives. But I do think that it's the responsibility of leadership to create a culture where folks can feel like they can be themselves and ask bold questions and set boundaries around how we interact with the technology we're expected to use. So we have some agency in how we collaborate and how we use these tools, and that's really important. And it's the responsibility of us as individuals to be courageous and obviously within a professional setting, you know, we want to be respectful and professional, but stand up and ask difficult questions and bring up interesting and different points, because I think that we talk a lot in this industry about innovation, like how can we create the next awesome technology, like the next AI tool that you can build avatars with your picture, whatever, you know. But I think that for us to keep up with digital transformation as humans, that we need to innovate on how we show up as human beings and how we interact with technology and how we interact with each other. Because, you know, with the invention of social media and the smartphone and all the tools and the devices that we are interacting with, it's very, very easy to become disembodied and to feel really alone and disconnected from other people, even though we're like constantly on these devices. And so we need to like seriously think of how we are showing up and how we're taking care of ourselves and innovating on our self-care and our relationships, so we can interact with technology in a healthy and balanced way.
Totally.
Amen. Yeah, so before we take it to audience Q&A, I realized in sort of the event pitch itself, I was promising something to you as an audience. So I want to talk to those couple of topics first. So I talked about engineering versus design as one topic, and sort of balancing that, or going from bottom up and top down and kind of meeting in the middle. But yeah, engineering versus design as a topic. And then the other one is eluding me at the moment. But I think that let's tackle that one, and I'll try to remember. Tech debt and future proofing. That was it. So if we can touch on those, then I'll feel like I've done my job as a promoter of an event. If anybody has anything to say about any of those topics.
Engineering versus design, that's a big, broad topic.
It's super broad.
Is there a question within that?
Well, Sariah, so we talked, and I thought it was really interesting, you know, coming from the head of product quality, that quality is kind of where design and engineering rubber meets the road, right? Like you know whether or not designs are understood and implemented, but like it's the last stop. Hopefully it's been dealt with sooner than that.
Yeah.
But like maybe you've had experiences where you're like, man, I wish that, you know, or we could have not needed to do digital transformation here, or now we have a conflict and here's how we deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who's worked as a QA lead and QA manager for years and years, you know, these themes, like there's these themes that show up in the work, and one of the themes is often a disconnect between engineering and design. And I feel like if we're doing good quality, like I don't necessarily approach QA from the perspective of that, you know, you build the thing and we're going to test it, that we are weaving quality practices into the process from the beginning. So someone from QA is looking at the designs, they're looking at the requirements, or the designs translating the requirements properly. You know, maybe not, we need to get the product owner and the designer to have a deeper conversation about something that we're noticing, or, you know, in the tickets to the design, you know, and just looking at the whole process of how all this information comes together, and get those folks speaking to each other to flesh out any gaps in the information that's being communicated. And if that's done well by the QA lead and the project lead and the product leads, and all the leads are doing their job and looking at things holistically, then I think we can avoid a lot of pitfalls when we're building technology.
I love it. Yeah. It inspired me to give me something. So Does anybody remember Macromedia?
Yes.
No, you
Flash.
I
Flash.
was thinking of the
You have to
1
install
pixel
that.
Shin, actually. In the old days, long ago, when we used to have to build web pages to designers' specs, it was like a long and painful process where they would give us this very detailed, I don't know, Illustrator file or Photoshop file or something, and we'd have to kind of like make the CSS look like that, right? So it's like a lot of struggle between design and engineering in the old days around interface precision. And nowadays we've got like all these great design systems and component libraries. Twitter Bootstrap was probably one of the first really popular versions of that. Now there's a ton of them. That really changed the game for the collaboration between design and engineering. And so there are organizations, like some large financial institutions that I've worked with in recent years, where we've had something like, oh, we need to rescan this client portal because our investors need to come and check their accounts. And so how long is it going to take to change this, to upgrade it to our new, branding style guide? And, there's a lot of like hand wringing and calculations, and the team comes back and it's like, 6 months, right? It's like 6 months to get this design to look like that, right? And so I think there is actually a really interesting connection between, the concept of engineering versus design and digital transformation, and that having everybody bought into the process of like, okay, engineers and designers need to be able to work together and share ideas and tooling and really work on their cross-functional collaboration is a part of most digital transformation efforts. So it's a little somewhat anecdotal, but that's what I thought of.
Hey, if I learned one thing tonight, I think it's connecting what you said about why as being the magic in the middle between something that engineering and design can both understand, or development and product management can understand. My favorite part of Agile is maybe user stories, and it's the thing that we get to the last sometimes. But if in a product management, product owner role, they're so critical. And what ends up happening at the end, we learn this. Here's a disaster recovery is when we switch to user stories and start adding so that I can blah 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 for this using this feature. We had test criteria built in that we could circle back to QA testing, user acceptance testing could actually validate, as a user, am I able to do this so that I can do this, right? As opposed to just, here's what the feature is that I need. And that's the why part of the user story. It's my favorite part of the user story, and user story might be my favorite part of Agile. Connecting engineering and UX.
Okay, so this is the last question for me, which was the future-proofing / tech debt section, and engineers often live in tech debt. I remember a few years ago, we had built this we'd been working on this Rails app that was Ruby on Rails app that was Greenfield a few years prior, and the person said, I don't feel like I'm coding in Ruby on Rails. I feel like I'm coding in the name of the platform that we had built. So it wasn't really like, the language anymore. It was all the constraints that we built in the platform, and it was out of date. So I guess, any interesting takes on tech debt, either avoiding or tackling?
I want to answer your question about tech debt, but I'm going to wait till the next sprint, okay?
I can give an example of a way that technical debt was tackled within a project that I liked, because I think oftentimes it's kind of swept under the rug, and like you said, we'll get to that. But actually detailing out, either having one ticket or a series of tickets or a column or a way to organize the technical debt that's really clear and has enough detail where it can be prioritized with the team so everybody can see it and make a decision about it and do some planning around it. That was really cool and really effective, and we actually tackled some outstanding technical debt that had been in the queue for a while, so I liked that. I thought that worked really well.
I will say that I forget where I heard it. I think it was like 5-6 years ago that maybe this is standard practice, but some companies will plan a product release that is simply a trust release, right? So hey, all we're doing is technical debt or fixing bugs or whatever, and then you just have to have really good marketing people who can write the description about for the App Store about what this release is actually about or not about.
Yeah, definitely. I read a lot of articles, and one of the most popular articles I've ever written was about how to explain technical debt to executives. People seem to like that topic. And really a lot of what it boils down to is like most systems, like I have as an engineer, I have a lot of respect for engineers. Like our systems, even the old ones that we hate working in, they weren't designed by idiots, right? Like we were all really smart when we first built that system. And we made the decisions based on, to talk about future-proofing, right? Like, we made the best engineering and architecture decisions we could with the information that we had at the time. And that information was not infinite, right? Like, business says they want X, okay? We will design the best possible version for X. We're halfway through building X and they already want like X.1, right? And so there's a drift that happens with business because of changes in the market, changes in strategy that happen almost instantly. As soon as you've written your first line of code on the system, things are already changing up in the boardroom, right? And so a lot of the reason why this happens is a gap in communication between the business and the technology part of the organization. There's not enough fluid and fast collaboration. So we're doing the best we can, and then 6 months later they want something totally different. And we never intended the system to be able to do that. And then they don't really give us enough time to completely rebuild it for the new purpose, right? So you just have to make it work in that purpose. And so there has to be, we get a little touchy-feely here, but there has to be empathy on both sides. So there's building empathy with, the business. We all want the business to understand engineering better. Yes, we can work towards that. That's sort of technically possible for them to grasp what we're going through as engineers or designers or product managers. But there's also a lot of empathy for them that we ourselves can take on as a responsibility as well. Like every line of code that we write is ultimately a business decision, right? It's automated business logic. And so we have to take responsibility for doing it in a way that's as flexible as possible, but also trying to stay in constant communication with where the business is going so that we can build systems that are flexible enough that we can keep up with it. So obviously there's responsibility on both sides, but we have to come to the table first if they're not going to do it, and hopefully they'll meet us there.
Okay, so are there any questions from the audience?
Okay, so we talked a lot about digital transformation and technical debt. I would like to know, what do you think when someone tells you that, or you read in the news articles that this particular company is going through a digital transformation? What is the first thing that comes in your mind? Is it transforming the application, their product, or it is also in terms of sales and marketing strategy that they are pitching in? So what is the first thing that comes in your mind if someone is starting a conversation with you or you read in a news article, this word, what that comes in your mind?
Well, I think the first thing, if I'm reading it in an article, is that they led with it as part of their marketing, or they ended with it as part of their marketing strategy. So the question is, what I would always ask, what really happened, right? What did they do? what was the problem? Like, I mean, it's like, what was the problem? What was the solution? What was the actual result? And they labeled it digital transformation. But marketing is one of my hats too, so I know how that works a little bit. But I would add, like what changed? Like, was there an organizational change? I think it goes back to we were putting together digital transformation and organizational transformation. Technical debt, organizational debt. The story about digital transformation is a story about organizational transformation, and that's why they teach case studies, in business school, because you want to know, hey, what actually happened, So that's what I dig into. Hopefully, the article is long enough and transparent enough to show some of that. I do love reading that, like how it actually happened, right? If they tell you.
Yeah, so you're on an airplane and you're reading an article in a magazine about that, or in the Wall Street Journal. My first thought is usually, so if it's like a big public company that we all brand name, has the old CEO recently been fired? Was there like some sort of crisis on the last earnings call? And the board is saying, we've got to do something. We need to announce, like, I was actually, one of the stories that Eric and I were talking about in our one-on-one was about, was talking about retail, and just to kind of pick a random example, I was in Target the other day with my 16-year-old kid who's looking for a product that he absolutely must have, and I was able to pull out the app and find the product, and it gave me a map in the store of what aisle the product is in, right? Like whether it was there, do we even bother to walk over to aisle 12, right? So like compared to other sort of laggard competitors they might have, who don't have that capability in their apps. And so there's a lot of competitive pressure that happens where, folks who can't keep up with that kind of digital integration that they have, or there's going to be a lot of competitive pressure that they're losing customers and market share. So there's usually some sort of story behind that that's putting pressure on the organization. And these days, I think if people say digital transformation in the newspaper, it's usually a bit of a Hail Mary that the organization's in some kind of trouble. It doesn't mean they can't pull it through, but it's usually a response to some kind of crisis.
I would agree with that.
And so we,
Take another question.
we've got time for one or two more questions if anybody else. Well, if no one else does, then for sure.
Yeah.
Luke?
Yeah, so you guys have been talking about organizational debt, technical debt. I'm going to throw in another term, architectural debt, and I would like you to each give one example of each.
Do we get a grade at the end?
Yeah, unfortunately, Sam, I'm going to handicap you by 10 points. The points are arbitrary.
So I think that maybe we could just talk to architectural debt at all. Does that exist?
Oh, yeah.
We talked about organizational, we talked about tech. Because I do think, I think about code review, for example, as being like a regular practice. I don't know how many people do a regular practice of architectural review.
We do.
You do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have our architectural review board. I'm not a part of it, but it's a group of engineers that are working on different projects that come together and review the architecture that's being proposed for different projects that we're working on. I mean, I just have a thought. I don't do architecture strategy, so it's not my wheelhouse, but it seems like architectural debt is would be one of the underpinnings of digital transformation, if you think about it.